Yo, welcome back to Corporate Counterculture. This is what I call a coffee break. We had our first episode for Corporate Counterculture. Pretty awesome, if I might add. Brian and Brian, the two Brians, y'all should give us a nickname. Brian and I discussed rewriting success metrics, and we got to unpack what success really looks like on a personal level versus what the agenda is within inside of your organization. One thing that I like to do though is go back and watch the footage. And so as I was doing that, in the midst of our conversation, I realized there were some things that I probably had additional thoughts on that I did not share because we were having such a good conversation. So on coffee breaks, what I'm going to do is pretty much just add additional commentary to things that I thought were very interesting. So here, I'm going to introduce the video of Brian and I, the two Brians, actually talking about expectations when you first got to college. I think it's really interesting to talk about that because so many of us had an idea of what work should look like, whether it was from experience or seeing our parents or what we were told in school, but we never really go back and I would say compare and contrast or revisit, discuss that and think about what that looks like now and if we would have done differently. So I want to play this clip where Brian is talking about this and then I want to add some commentary. So let's get into this. Really excited for you guys to follow our journey. So as always, if you see something interesting, if I say something interesting, if Brian says something interesting, please feel free to comment. All right. Don't forget to subscribe. Here's Brian talking.
I feel like in recent years, though, all that's gone out the window. Like if I were to think back to when I was first getting out of school, it was definitely I had in my mind it was 2015, it was mid 2010s, right? So I definitely had in my mind, okay, I want to wear like a suit and tie. Like I had done pizza deliveries for high school and college, and then I also came from like a working family, so everybody had uniforms and things like that. And so I was like, okay, suit and tie, that type of thing is what I wanted. As I got hired at my first place, though, my first position, I was the only one that was wearing a tie, and that was like my own brain telling me this is what I should do now to kind of get that respect, that recognition,
Yeah.
right in the door. Even though I'm the new guy, if I dress better than everybody else, then maybe it'll help me, right, in some way, in one form or another. And then you start developing, okay, well, you kind of stand out like a sore thumb if you're dressed so differently from everybody else. And also, too, depending on the field that you're in, it has to be appropriate, right? So if I was going into manufacturing facilities, very, very dirty facilities, wearing steel toes and requiring PPE, like hard hats and all that stuff, high vis vests, doesn't really make sense that I'd be wearing a tie also, right? Doesn't make sense that I'd be wearing some dress shoes and some slacks or something like that. It'd make more sense if I'm wearing jeans or steel toes and so forth. And then fast forward to like pandemic, right? And everybody's working from home. So now everybody's working in their literally in their pajamas, sweatpants, sweatshirts, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And then even a few more years in, with all these advances in social media and everything else, even just working for a corporation in general has been has basically been the goal to get away from that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the entrepreneurship and being an influencer and all these other things are things that are all now intrinsic factors in a way to get away from the grind, I'd say. And I think that in general there's a happy medium there.
All right. All right. All right. So, man, I think that's very interesting. Brian talked about, when you graduate, you want to wear the suit and tie. And where did that come from? I think it comes from being so the dream, the American dream, that suit and tie, that family, the house, all those things. I remember I talked about it actually too, wanting to wear a suit and tie. But even in that, he said, I was the only one wearing a suit or wearing a tie, rather. And that's interesting because even in settings that may not require the effort we think we should be putting in, we still put in that extra effort. And I think we just have become an embodiment of these life coach quotes, right? So dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And see it, you got to believe it before you see it. All these type of things where even as he talks about leaving the tie and then going into different spaces where they don't wear ties, you almost become have a misidentification of who you are, because you've already created this person in your head and you're living as this person even though the world is changing before you. And I completely agree with that because I struggled with that as well. What I really think um, is an issue that a lot of people don't talk about when you graduate college a, is the idea of personal beliefs and purpose, right? We personally believe that we're going to be this major contributor to society and do all these great things. And I think a lot of us are doing those things, whether it's a simple job or a very detailed, complex job. You're contributing to society in some way, right? I think there's art and output and productivity in everything. There's an art to creating a tire. That's creative to me. There's an art to excel. That's creative to me. So I really do feel like everybody is giving some type of purpose in this world. But how does that align with your personal beliefs, right? Because the job you work is somebody else's. It's pretty much an output, a creation of somebody else's personal beliefs. So now your purpose is in their personal beliefs. But as Brian said, now the happy medium is, hey, work at your job, keep your job at your job, and then find some sense of entrepreneurship. That intersection is tough because if you spend so much time contributing to somebody else's dream, now how do you pivot and start to give energy towards your own, right? Even if you're doing something like, hey, let's say you're a trainer at a gym, you've been training under the structure of a brand that was here before you. Now how do you start to become your own person with your own structures and your own equipment, maybe your own facility? How do you get to that space? Even managing your own payroll or your own payments and accounting. How do you get to that space when you've been contributing to somebody else's for so long? That gets tough. And so I think that's where we also see this reckoning of younger generations embracing the gig economy, because it does allow for them to have flexibility in work, and it does give them back more of their time. And it's crazy because the gig economy does seem one-sided, right? It seems like the companies, which is still corporate America, it seems like they're the only ones really benefiting. But when I think about it, the freedom that some of these younger generations have through that structure, I'd argue, does provide an opportunity for more work-life balance. Because for somebody like me, you live in certain cities, and then you get used to certain pay. And then if you move further out from that city, there's less jobs that that fit your resume, right? So I lived in LA and got plenty of calls for jobs. Then I lived in Pasadena, still LA adjacent, plenty of calls for jobs. The further out I started to move, though, people started to look at my address and say, hey, will you come into the office? Even if it was a remote job, people were wondering what I thought about commuting. And so, and there weren't as many jobs for my roles out further where I was living than it was in LA. So, but I think my issue and a lot of people's issue is you get to a certain lifestyle and you embrace a certain language, and then you kind of create this trap within your own life of living a certain way, doing certain things, buying certain things, and now you can't necessarily pivot as much as you'd like. And I think you eventually get to a space where Brian was talking about where, you know what, it's only going to get as good as it's going to get here. And in order for me to live the way I want to live, I have to take a step back and add other areas in my life so that I can have a balance of leverage. Not necessarily looking to usurp corporate America, but to have some type of leverage where, hey, this situation, if it's removed from me, if I'm laid off, regardless of how great of a performer I am or high of a performer I am, no matter how much I contribute to this company financially from a revenue perspective, they can let me go because it's about shareholder wealth, not employee well-being, right? So in order for me to create some type of balance, maybe I make six figures and in my job, just sometimes creating $500 a month is enough to make you feel some type of sense of ownership and ability and give yourself confidence so that if things do happen, you know that you have the ability to generate money outside of your 9 to 5 structure. So it's crazy because most people in my space, in my age, they don't want to leave their high paying job or their good paying job to make less. The good thing about these kids, these younger kids coming out of college now, is they're living on purpose and in purpose in a way where they can say, hey, you know what? That 30,000, that 40,000, that 50,000, I'll take that plus my freedom. And that may be at the expense of living on my own. Maybe that's fine. I'll live with my parents or I'll get 3, 4, 5 roommates and I will stretch this money and then go slow into I find a space that is sustainable financially for me. Because everybody wants security, right? But I think these younger kids, this younger generation, their security is freedom, not necessarily the ability to go to Tulum or Cabo or Greece or a Michelin star restaurant. They just like being able to enjoy themselves and have freedom of time and don't have the weight and anxiety of work on them outside of work. Because let's be honest, a lot of people who've been in corporate America long enough, you take work home and then you wake up thinking about work. And if you're remote, like Brian talked about, you never leave work. You can be watching TV at 10 p.m. at night. And you know what happens? Somebody sends an email and then you hear that email. And so you try to fight it and you don't check the email. But guess what? Work gave you a phone and that phone's sitting next to you. Now you check that phone that work gave you. You read it, you try to ignore it. Next thing you know, you're on your laptop at 11 p.m. doing work. And it becomes a cycle where you never leave work, which is fine because I believe that there's more so work-life integration instead of work-life balance. So it's fine to answer emails if you think you have the bandwidth and you're not doing anything and what the heck, let me get it out the way. But the freedom from work is not there. So I guess my question is, would you take less money if you had to do it all over again, leaving college, like Brian said? Would you take significantly less money and significantly alter your lifestyle to have freedom in a way where you actually did have more time and more control of your time? Would you change that, or would you go down the same path of, hey, I'm going to work this 9 to 5 structure? And some of us are, even if we're there early before our boss, we don't leave until our boss leaves. But would you become a gig economy person, or would you say, hey, nope, that 9 to 5 where I get there at 8, take a 15-minute break at 10, then get a 30-minute lunch at 12, and then get another 15-minute break at 2, and then get off at 4:30 or 5 o'clock and then drive an hour back home in traffic? I would still take that. Which one would you choose? Would you be more of a gig economist? Would you be more entrepreneurial and maybe and yes, take less money and kind of figure it out, maybe stay at home and things like that? Or would you say, nope, I like my life, I like my apartment, I like being able to go on vacations when I want. If it comes with the stress of having to deal with work outside of work and the mental capacity being somewhat heavy, I'll take that. Let me know. Let me know what you would do. All right. So again, this is Corporate Counterculture. We plan to release episodes weekly. If there's anything you're thinking about in corporate America that you want to know, why do they do that? Why do we still do that? Should we change that? Feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to send us a message and we will discuss it. All right. Take care. Peace.